Good morning, good night, depending on where you are. My name is Stuart Clark. I am the Senior Decoupled Developer at Reality Loop in Australia. I've been working with Drupal for around 15 years now, and Vue for around 3 or 4 years as well, primarily within Nuxt, which is an amazing framework. And I'm the project lead of DruxtJS, which I'm here to talk to you about today. So let's do it. What is Druxt? Druxt is a fully decoupled framework for front-end developers to build modern user experiences for Drupal using Nuxt.js. Unlike regular Drupal decoupling, Druxt consumes both content and configuration, which allows for things such as entities and forms to have fields with display modes, views, blocks, block regions, and more. And it gives you the ability to both do it the Drupal way, but also do it the JavaScript way, and somewhere in between. Do it your way. Druxt exists to provide a better and easier front-end experience because, in my opinion, Drupal doesn't do a good enough job for the front end on its own. Druxt is fully decoupled, which means that it requires 2 code bases, Drupal for the back end and Nuxt.js for the front end. Both Drupal 8 and 9 are supported, although given the end of life Drupal 8, that's less important. And Druxt can also be installed on existing sites or distributions such as Contenta CMS. If you're not familiar with Nuxt, it's a modular Vue.js framework, much like Drupal is a modular PHP framework. It does all the hard things that you don't want to have to do when decoupling or working with JavaScript. It handles the building and chunking of your JavaScript bundle. It provides extensible page-based routing. It supports server-side and client-side rendering, as well as static site generation. Nuxt 2 uses Vue 2, as does Druxt at this stage, but Nuxt 3 is due for a public beta this month, which will add support for Vue 3. And fingers crossed, there will also be news relating to a compatible version of Druxt as well. You can find out more about Nuxt at nuxtjs.org. To put it simply, Druxt is Drupal plus Nuxt. So Druxt is a big project and there is a lot to talk about, and 45 minutes isn't enough time to cover everything here in the detail that it deserves. The slides are available. I've put the link in the chat already. It's druxt101.slides.realityloop.com. You can take them and peruse at your own time, and there's plenty of links and examples that I'll be discussing today. I'm also happy to make myself available to anyone who wants to learn more about Druxt or contribute to Druxt. You can find me on the Drupal Slack Druxt channel, as well as the Druxt Discord server, as well as Twitter. So let's get into it. Druxt site is the quickest way to get started if you're looking to build a decoupled site. It's basically a zero config setup that will get all of the required front-end modules to build a semi-traditional Drupal site that has a Vue.js-based theming system. So installing Drupal is relatively straightforward. Composer create project using the Drupal recommended project will get you everything that you need. Sorry about the small font size, but the video is also available on the DruxtJS YouTube channel to watch at your own time as well. And once Drupal is downloaded, which only takes a few seconds, you will then need to download the Druxt module. So Drupal is done. So onto the Druxt module. The Druxt module will download all the dependencies, which is the JSON-API menu items module, the JSON-API views module, and a few other things that are required. And in this demo here, I'm using the Drupal Quick Start script to get up and running, but in a real development environment, I would use DDev or Lando or something similar. Once your server is up and running, which it will be in half a tick, all you need to do is enable the Druxt module, which I'll do now. And after that, you just need to add a permission to a role of your choice. So in this demo, I'm just using the anonymous role because it's relatively simple to do so. And that just exposes read-only access to some required JSON API resources. Once that's done, we can hop over to Nuxt. So Nuxt is also relatively simple to set up. The command npx create Nuxt app will take you through a wizard to install all the tools that you want, including your UI framework. I didn't install one in that video because I don't want to bias anyone, but there are some really good frameworks that will get you started really, really quickly. Kind of like a theme, but yeah, not so much. Let's jump ahead. Unfortunately, NPM is a little bit slower than I'd like it to be for this demo, but that's fine. So once that is downloaded, it's simply a case of installing the Druxt site module or downloading the Druxt site module, which is going to download the dependencies, the Druxt modules that are required to get up and running. And after that, you just need to configure. So Nuxt uses a nuxt.config.js file, and it's simply a case of enabling the module and setting up your Druxt configuration. So just the base URL is required, but in the slide here, you can see I've also got a setting. There is a range of different settings that you can use, which are available in some level of detail on the documentation site druxtjs.org. Okay, so that is done, base URL set. And then the last thing you need to do is just run npm run dev or yarn, depending on what you're using. So I'll skip ahead now to a demo. You can follow along with this as you want with that link there. I did stick that in the chat. Gitpod.io for the Quick Start Druxt site repository. I'll be doing this locally. I have this here, so I'm just going to run npm run dev. You can see I've already got my Drupal site ready to go using the standard installation profile. And I'll just open up localhost 3000 here while it does its thing. So the repository is set up with Drupal pre-installed and configured using DDev, and Nuxt pre-installed with the Druxt site module. This is the configuration I'm using here, which is a cut down version of the repository with Tailwind CSS, as well as Daisy UI setup. And I'm using the Bartik theme here, which means that the blocks that are rendered here, so you can see, a whole bunch of stuff is going on already. You've got a bunch of missing wrapper components for blocks, but that's because Drupal provides a whole bunch of information about what blocks can be rendered for this theme, but not enough information yet to render every single block by default. So some blocks will render, some won't. So let's have a look anyway. If I open up the Vue developer tools, which is essential for anyone doing any Vue development or Nuxt development, we can have a look at what we have here. So I have no layouts directory or pages. Well, I do have a pages directory, but it's empty. I have no components. All I have is this configuration. So the Druxt site module is injecting in a default layout with the Druxt site component. And that component will use the theme that's provided to render a whole bunch of block regions. And this is data that it gets from the backend, the Drupal website. So if we go and have a look at our block layouts here, we'll see for Bartik, we have all of these different regions here. And if you have a look at the content region, we have page title, tabs, help, primary actions, and main content. So if we look at the front end, we can see the same thing here. Now, the order isn't correct, unfortunately, and that's because the Drupal JSON API module doesn't expose the order that regions should be displayed, but the order of the blocks within the regions is correct. So page title, local tasks, help, local actions, and content. Because Druxt consumes the configuration and content, that means that I can go into the back end, or your site builder can go into the back end, change things around, including the visibility of blocks, and save that, and then go back to the front end, and we'll just reload that. And you can see now that the content region has actually moved to the top, because that's reflecting what the back end wants, which enables you to do a little bit more. The current page that's rendered is determined by the router, the Druxt router module, which communicates with the decoupled router in the back end. So in the case of this site here, we're seeing just the homepage here, which has no content, which is reflected here. So this is a view, the front page view, which you can see down here in the developer tools, front page, and no content displayed. So we'll go ahead and create some content in the back end, add content, and add an article. Hello, DrupalCon Europe, and put in some hello, how are you, and an image. Oh no, that's a shame. I tested that and oh, did I pick the wrong one? Aha. Nope, it's going to make me have a demo fail. Let's see what happens when I hit save. No image, but that's okay. So let's go back to the front end and reload that. And we can now see that we've got some content come through. Now this content is, again, the configuration is managed in the back end. So if we go and have a look at the content type for our article, we can change the display, and had the image worked on the teaser display, it would be shown above. Unfortunately, I did not remove the image from my server, so that caused problems. That's okay. You have a look here inside of the view, and we can see that the view is now rendering out an entity, a Druxt entity. And that Druxt entity in turn is rendering out a Druxt field, the body field. And that contains a whole bunch of information. So schema information that's provided by the backend that tells the front end or the front end developer exactly what to do with this field. Okay, so let's jump back into our slides now. There's a lot going on there. Whoops, sorry, 1 second. There we go. There's a lot going on there, so I'll just recap quickly. So during the build process, Nuxt will generate the Druxt schema files, and during the render process, by default, this will render a Druxt site, which will render all the available block regions for the configured theme, and they will render all the available and visible block regions that they can, including but not limited to the breadcrumbs, menu, and the main content block, the router. And the router, depending on the route that you're on, will resolve to currently either a Druxt view, which will render the available entities, or an entity, which will use the Druxt schema information to render all the available fields, and say those fields are entity references like paragraphs or images, it will go through and render those as well. So let's talk a little bit about theming, because it doesn't look great at the moment, it's just data. So Druxt uses a Druxt wrapper component theming system, which uses props and slots to allow you to take full control or use the same defaults based on the Drupal configuration. So by default, it will render out what Drupal tells it to within reason, but you have full control over what you want to render. It's basically a hybrid of Drupal's own theming system, but using Vue single file components instead of Twig, JavaScript, and CSS. And everything is components by design. So I'm going to give a bit of a Vue crash course because this is DrupalCon, and I'm going to assume that not everyone here is familiar with Vue.js or Nuxt. And I'm going to do my best to explain how it works, but there are far better resources and teachers out there than me. I'd recommend having a look at vuejs.org. They've got some really good resources there. So this is an example of a Vue single file component. It's a single file that contains everything needed to make for your component. So it's got your markup, which can contain your props and your slots and your other components and everything you need, your JavaScript and your styling. So this is personally, I think, one of the biggest benefits of decoupling, the single file component approach, having everything encapsulated in a single place. If you've ever spent time digging through Drupal.js behaviors or heavily nested CSS files, it's definitely worth looking closer at Vue as an alternative. Vue components have access to attrs and props, or attributes and properties, as well as mixins and slots, among other things. In the case of the Druxt entity wrapper component, this example here, your attrs and props are the data that the component has retrieved from Drupal via the JSON API. Mixins are just helpers to set up your component, and in the case of most Druxt components, they simply register your props. And slots are template regions that are injected into the component. So Druxt components use slots to provide same defaults, such as in the case of a Druxt entity wrapper, there's a slot for each different field that the particular schema says is to be rendered, which means inside of your Druxt wrapper component, like this example here, you can just render out what the field image slot expects. If you don't want to do that, then you can render out the data that's provided in the props for the field image instead and take full control. So the screenshot on the right is data provided by the Vue developer tools. And it shows you everything that you've got access to. So absolutely, if you're doing anything with Vue, make sure that you have the Vue developer tools. It's wonderful. As of Nuxt 2.13, they added the components module, which will automatically scan the components directory and register the components that you have so that you don't have to. And subdirectories in that will be used to generate prefixed components. So it allows for logical grouping of your components. For instance, druxt/entity/node/article/teaser becomes druxt entity node article teaser. And the Druxt components provide multiple options for the wrapper component that it will use, much like Drupal's own template suggestions, which allows for a wrapper per entity display mode or view display, views display, I should say, etc. And you can see the available options using the Vue developer tools. They're shown on the Druxt components under data.components.options. And Nuxt.js Storybook module is an absolute essential one for any of the theming. So it's what I'm going to be using today to take you through. And it allows for Nuxt modules to provide integration with Storybook. So this allows for Druxt modules to provide auto-generated stories that use live data from your Drupal backend, allowing you to theme your components using real content. So let's jump into some live theming and fingers crossed. So I'm just going to run Storybook here. So it's just as simple as running npx nuxt storybook once you've got the module installed. And while that takes far too long to actually spin up, I will jump across to, whoops, this one here. So I'll drop that in the chat and you can all have a look at that. This is the storybook for the Umami demonstration website. So if we jump down to node article view displays and we go over to the docs, we can see an example of a article or a set of article wrappers. So this is the default view. This is card view, card common, etc. If we jump into the canvas, what this tool allows us to do, let's get rid of that and put that up there, is it allows us to navigate through all the different content that our site has access to and see what it looks like with this wrapper. And it allows us to look at the form schema version or look at different display modes for this same piece of content. So as a front-end developer, it's really a nice experience to do some theming. We're nearly there. Yep. My storybook is now up and running, and I only have that one piece of content, and I feel kind of silly because I really should have made more content, especially some with a image that actually worked, but we will continue anyway. So let's have a look here. Whoops, not pages. So here we go. Here's our content. Hello, how are you? We can see here that the default display mode is trying to show a comment field. There's no out-of-the-box comment field rendering, but you can make your own wrapper for that field and any other field and style it however you want. However, I'm going to look at the teaser instead, and I'm going to go back into this canvas here. So I'll open up the View Developer Tools, maybe. Oh no, where are my View Developer Tools? They're not going to show. I'm going to do this instead. I'm going to open this in a new tab. I'm not sure which version of the tools I have, and they're still not going to show. Oh, there we go. Okay. So here's the View Developer Tools, and we can have a look at this component in isolation. So this is the Druxt entity, and we can see here under data component options that for this particular view mode, I can render these different components. So to do that, all I need to do, as I have the components module enabled, which is actually required for Druxt at this stage, is create a component with the correct naming convention. So druxt/entity/node/article/teaser.view. Oh no, spell it correctly. There we go. And then if I were to put in some valid view markup, I can say testing. All right, so we save that and let's hot reload and we can see testing has come through. So if you have a look at the Druxt entity, previously it was rendering a Druxt wrapper, which is just a placeholder. Now it's rendering our newly created component, the Druxt entity node article teaser. So I'm going to go across to Daisy UI, which is what I'm using for my demonstration today. And I'm going to jump in to the cards and I'm going to grab this one here. So just this markup here and close that now. And I'm going to drop that directly into my component. And oh no, I forgot to grab the first character. And then I'm going to format that. So that's come through now, and this is closer to what I actually want to render on my website. So once you've got your base markup in place, we need to actually map some of the real data into place. So there's a few different ways you can do that. This here, this paragraph is the body in our case. So the simplest way is to use the slot system, and I can just drop in slot name equals body and save that. And we get our data. Hello, how are you? For the title, however, there's no slot because Drupal doesn't treat a title as a field and therefore it's not exposed as such. So I have to grab that in a slightly different method. So let's have a look at our actual wrapper component. And we can see that we have a whole bunch of attrs. Now, I don't want to use attrs because they're actually exposed in the HTML source. So I'm going to go and register my mixin, which I can do by typing this: Druxt, import Druxt entity mixin from Druxt entity, and then mixins Druxt entity mixin. If I save that now, then that will register all of that data as props instead, as well as a few additional ones. My personal favorite to use is model. Oops, I'm on the field at the moment. Let's jump back to this. But everything is reactive. So whether or not you use model or entity or fields, it's all reactive. So I'm just going to replace horizontal with entity attributes title. Entity.attributes.title. Save that. And now we've got our title. So I think we can leave it there. This concept applies to all of the Druxt components, but there's only so much time in the world, so let's move on. And whoops, we will talk about single page applications. So, well, Druxt gives you an out-of-the-box site experience. It's mostly still based around doing it the Drupal way. And while you can take full control of how things are rendered, it's not always what you want to do. So the benefit of decoupling is that you can do it your own way instead. One of the biggest client needs that I've seen unfulfilled by Drupal over the years is the ability to make campaign pages or single page applications that use their Drupal content and also their branding, but isn't locked into the Drupalisms. And I often see people build completely separate systems that don't use any of the Drupal content. So decoupling allows you a lot more ability to do this. Druxt components that are used by the Druxt site module can also be used on their own, which means that you can take a Druxt entity or a Druxt block or a Druxt view and put them anywhere you want, be it a Nuxt page, a custom component, or even within another Druxt wrapper. So you can have an entity that renders a menu or a menu that renders views. It's entirely up to you. Each different Druxt module provides different components that you can use, and they can be installed without using the Druxt site module. So for instance, if you wanted a site just with Druxt entity, then that's the module you'd download, that's the module you'd install in your Nuxt config. You can find out more about each of the different modules at druxtjs.org. And Storybook is still the best way to work with these components, especially if you're building campaign sites. You can give your client or your front-end developers or your campaign site builders, your marketing team, access to Storybook, and it allows them to browse through all the available content that they have and then copy and paste the markup and just paste it straight into a page. When you're using Druxt components directly, while the Druxt wrapper component system is still respected, you can also take full control of the default slot contents using template injection. So you can think of the Druxt component as a client module. It takes the provided props that you give it, mode, type, UUID in this case. It sends that through to Drupal, it pulls back the data, and it gives you access to that within the default template. So in this example here, you can see that we're loading an entity and then we're passing its props to an article object. And then we can render out what we need from that. So the title, the summary, and we can also pass through to other nested Druxt components. So in this case, I'm using the image field relationship to render out just the image itself. I was going to do a live demo of that, but given that my images didn't work, that's fine. I'll do it anyway. I can generate some more images quickly, hopefully. So let's go and do that and see how we go. Tdev drush gen c bundles equals article. Oh, what did I do? Oh, so that'll give me some new content. I'm just going to kill Storybook and start that up again in a second. All right, do that. Okay, so let's jump into Nuxt, and I'll make a page here. So campaign, so to make, whoops, what happened there? Something happened, doesn't matter. To make a page in Nuxt, you simply just make a view file within your pages directory. There's a lot of cool things you can also do with slugs and dynamic pages and paths and all the sorts of things, but there's only so much I can do in this time. If you would like to see more examples, find me and talk to me. I'm always happy to show and get people involved. So if we jump over, yes, it did some hot reloading in the background, but that's okay. We'll just reload that. And you can see we've got a whole bunch of content now with that same image. That's fine. So if we go to campaign, we'll get this page just rendering test, which is cool. All right, so I'm just going to grab the example from that slide, and that UUID will be totally wrong, but that's okay. Whoops, grab too much, and drop that in there. Hopefully Storybook is back up and running, so I can see some more content. I'll just reload that. Let's check. It's not, because yes, no, it is. Great. Okay. So let's get a UUID from something. This is going to be awkward to get it. Oh my gosh, live demos. View, no. All right, let me just open this in another window again. Inspect this. It's not going to give me what I want. Okay. DDev. No. Oh my gosh. All right. I'm just going to pass on this demo because it's not going to happen. So let's move on. And we're going to talk about entity forms and reactivity. So the DruxtEntityForm component is just an extension of the DruxtEntity component. It uses the same field system, but using configuration from form displays instead of displays. It also has basic support for post and patch requests to send your data to the Drupal backend. The vModel directive allows for data binding. This is a view thing, allows for data binding on view components. And it's reactive, which means any changes that you make to the objects that are bound will be instantly synchronized between your components. The example at the bottom there is of a simple pattern to have a Druxt entity and a Druxt entity form bound to the same model, which allows for live preview editing of content. So I'll move on. The contact form here in this screenshot is an example of the Druxt entity form, and you can actually see that on the DruxtJS, the Umami demo. So demo.druxtjs.org, and go to contact, and you can use that. It supports validation as well, which is provided by Drupal. So this is a advanced example of a editing experience. So I call it the EditBar. The video is on YouTube on the DruxtJS channel. I'm just going to jump in and actually show you this here. It'd be nice if it was in full screen. Let's just drag this over here, and I'll drop that into the chat as well, so you can have a look for yourself. Now, take into account this is a little bit buggy. I recommend hitting the Edit tab before you hit the Edit bar. Oh no, yeah, there we go. Maybe hit it twice, and that will remove the little bug. So this is here kind of a typical Drupal-esque editing experience, but the Edit bar over here is the hotness, and that will take that same DruxtEntityForm and just put it in a sidebar, but it allows us to see some of this reactivity. So for instance, let's have a look at preparation time. If I go up and down, you can see that change in the actual content. If I change, well, let's do this one. This one's great. If I remove the image and then I hit add media, I get a little pop-up here, and this pop-up is actually showing Drupal's media view and just rendering that out in the front end with a little bit of handling, so I can change the image to something else. Then we have our summary, which is using a CK editor widget in the front end, and I can make my live changes here, and it's all wonderful. So that's just a bit of an example of what could be done using using Druxt in the front end to provide an editing experience. It's not an out of the box of Druxt, it's rather an implementation of what you could do with Druxt. So let's jump back over here, and we'll just get back to here. Okay, so another demo and another one that you can try for yourself is the nearly headless blog. I can't copy and paste that. That's super annoying, but I can open it. No, I already have it open, but it's gone to sleep. So let's see what happens, how long it's going to take to get that up and running again. Oh no, probably too long. We shall see. So this example here is a headless and serverless blog. If it gets back up and running. Come on, bear with me. This is where I'd add music, but I don't have any music to add. Come on, Gitpod, do your stuff. If you haven't used Gitpod, oh my God, it's incredible. Use it. I do 90% of my development using Gitpod nowadays. It's a little bit slow to get up and running, but it means that I don't have to run Docker on my local machine, which is definitely a pro. My main demo here is running locally, but I have had past experiences where my entire machine has just melted down while trying to do too much. While that is going, I will just have a look if there's any questions. So if you have questions, feel free to throw them in. I'm going to have a look at the Q&A tab first. Wow, there's a lot. Does the live editing demo save each little change? That demo that I showed, the edit bar, doesn't do any communication with the back end, but it could and would if it was a real implementation. I welcome anyone to get involved with working on these demos. All the source code's available, so you can help out and do it. And I'm happy to show people how to use it as well. Vuetify, I love it. Vuetify with Nuxt. Yeah, Vuetify is great. I want to build something with Vuetify. I just haven't had the right thing to build yet. There's a project called Viewer, V-U-E-R, which is working on a authoring experience with Druxt. So it allows for someone to connect to backends, multiple different backends, and do their content editing from that. And that uses Vuetify. I would build something similar as well with that. in my experience, component-based systems are only feasible if the designer also sticks with the philosophy. Yeah, I don't entirely agree, but it would be great if you do have a designer that is specifically doing component-based design. But the way that Druxt deals with things is slightly different to the way that standard component-based design works, because Druxt treats everything that's provided from Drupal as components. So within that, you would potentially have your molecules and stuff being used within your Druxt entity wrapper or your Druxt view wrapper, that sort of thing. But yeah, they're separate types of components. How much influence can a content manager client have on the order displayed content via the backend? Well, the whole point of Druxt is that they could have pretty much full control. So the majority of decoupled systems that I see, they sort of say like, here's the API, consume our data and do whatever you want with it in the front end. But that means that the front-end developer has the total say. The idea behind Druxt is that you can still do things in the back end, and the front end should be able to read the configuration and understand what is expected of it. So it will do what you tell it to do, or it won't. It's up to you. You could have full control, you could have no control. About missing title fields, can we solve this problem via contrib? Yeah, so any fields that you add, as long as they do standard field stuff, will do standard field stuff in Druxt. I'm running low on time, and this, I don't know if this demo is ever going to get up and running. It's getting close. So it's nearly there. It's probably pointless now. That one is actually a good demo though, because it does do live updating of content. But I'll jump across here while it's doing stuff, and I'm just going to show you this. So static site generation is probably one of the most important reasons to fully decouple and to use something like Nuxt, because it's just dead easy. All you have to do in your Nuxt config is set target to static. If you want fully static content, as in rendered and stored in the HTML, you need to make sure your SSR, but that is a default. So as long as you haven't set SSR false, then you are SSR true. Whoops, I got to click down here. And then it's as simple as running npm run generate. And what will happen is Nuxt will build the bundle as it would normally do, and then it will render it locally and it'll spider it. It'll crawl it. It'll look for any links that are rendered in any pages that it knows about. So if it doesn't know about any pages, you can add them via the generate routes option, which is what I've had to do for this demo. But it will go through and it'll generate all of them, and then you can serve that up locally to run your static content, or you can host it on Vercel or Netlify or wherever you want. So let's move on and talk about this, because I'm nearly out of time. Get involved. I really hope that people can get involved with this project, because it's a massive project and I've been working on it mostly solo for the last few years. So if you're interested in getting involved, you can find me on the Discord server and the Druxt Slack channel and ask me more. I run Druxt office hours every Wednesday Australian time, so 9 a.m. to 5 o'clock in the afternoon. I know that's not the best time zone for everyone, but it's my time zone, so that's all I can really do. Here's a bunch of resources. So again, have a look at the slides. I'll post the link to them again in a minute. There's tons of things that you can have a look at to get involved. On the Druxt side, there's a bunch of documentation that needs to be better. It's not very good documentation because I'm a developer. There's the mono repo that I've spent the last few months reworking and making a really good contributor experience. It's set up to work with Gitpod. It's pretty good. Support, as I said, there's a whole ton of Drupal modules that, are part of this project. So if you can't contribute on the Nuxt side, looking after any of these modules, helping out with any of these modules is a big help. Ideally, the Druxt module shouldn't exist. Ideally, it should just be a completely vanilla solution, but at the moment it has to. I plan to deprecate it in the future, and I welcome anyone to help me with that. There's also Contenta Slack channel, Decoupled Slack channel, and the Decoupled Menu initiative that you should get involved with as well. The Umami parody project, which you can find the site demo.druxtjs.org, also a Netlify version. The source code for the front end and the source code for the back end is all on GitHub. That's basically my primary goalpost for this project. So having people involved with that outlines any things that still needs to be worked on. I'd like to say thank you to Reality Loop, who I am a part of, for sponsoring a big portion of the development time, and for Amazi.io for the hosting they've provided. And I'm going to jump back into some more questions and answers until I get booted or whatever. So let's have a look. What else do we have here? Why do you use Discord chats, not Slack? Because Discord has video conferencing built into it, and it's better for that sort of thing. I do a lot of live development while I'm during the Druxt office hours, so people can drop in and they can see what I'm doing, and I can help out with things. It's just a little bit harder on Slack. Also, the JavaScript world lives on Discord, so that's kind of where Druxt is mostly. I maintain presence in both. Thank you for the talk. Thank you for coming. Just wondering how you see the ongoing JavaScript initiatives. Look, I want to see more JavaScript initiatives, but I want to see, and I've raised it with a few others, I want to see a JavaScript client initiative. Because I think that's a more important part. Menu is important, and all the things around menu is super important. There's a lot of great work that's been going on. But personally, I have the JSON-API menu items module, which works great for me. It's the client that I don't want to have to maintain, and I don't want to see too many different options that exist. Upvoted, that's a very good point. Upvoted questions. 5, similar to my previous JavaScript support question, what is the level of support for multilingual sites? So that's a big one on my list of to-dos, and that's why I have the Umami parody project. Multilingual has to be done, and I'm sure it's far more important for the European audience. For Australian audience, it's a little bit harder because we don't really speak any language very well. But I have looked into it, and I know it is possible. It's just a matter of time and resources. I would like to make the 1.0 version of Druxt based on all the functionality of the Umami site, and that includes multilingual. What's the #1 thing you wish JSON-API did differently? I don't have many problems with the JSON API. I think it's actually pretty good. I don't know. I don't really have a good answer for that one. I think the state of decoupling in Drupal is actually really good. GraphQL, do you have plans to move to GraphQL instead of JSON API? So one of the core things around Druxt is I want it to be as vanilla as possible. I don't want you to have to install anything at all into Drupal. And at the moment, that means JSON API is the right way to go. The reason I think JSON API is definitely the way to go is you can have one front end that can connect to any Drupal backend. It doesn't matter how they're set up. As long as they have the JSON API, Druxt should be able to read their configuration and understand how they work. If I added support for GraphQL, I can't guarantee that would be the case. I do, however, have an open issue, and I am entirely open to discussing it more with others. I don't know the use case because I haven't used GraphQL all that much myself. As completely new to decoupled sites, which are Surface, very JS heavy, is there any support for users who have JavaScript disabled? Absolutely. Go to the Umami demo site and turn off JavaScript. Because it's server-side rendered, it works. it works basically the same. That was one of the early things that I did with Druxt to make sure that that worked, because I know a lot of people always point out that one thing, that JavaScript being disabled. People don't disable JavaScript, but it works anyway if you did. What else have we got? Do you see Svelte as a serious contender yet? I haven't used Svelte, so I don't know. And along the same lines, I was actually going to add a slide in, just like, why not React? Why not Svelte? Why not yada, yada, yada? And the answer to that is like, why not all? And the work that I've been doing with Druxt, a lot of it can work with React already. The Druxt schema module is the one example I go to over and over. And that is, it can work with any node project. The Vue components obviously don't work with anything other than Vue, but I do see the possibility to add additional types of components in the future. Is the performance good enough without...
Hey, Stuart, sorry for interrupting, but we are really over time here. So maybe we can answer these questions on Druxt Slack channel
Absolutely.
on Drupal
Yep.
Slack.
Yep.
I'll post
Reach out
these
to me.
remaining questions there so you can easily find them. And
Yep.
guys, thanks for attending. Please fill the survey form. It's working now. Thank you for the session, Stuart.
Thank you very much.